7 women, 30 years, all killed inside a family home in suburban Long Island, while his wife cooked dinner in the same kitchen, while his kids did homework upstairs, while neighbors thought he was just a quiet architect who walked his dog. His wife's hair was found on the victims' bodies. His daughter's hair too. They had no idea they were living with a serial killer. His manifesto said, "Playtime." That's what Rex Heuermann called torturing women in his basement while his family was on vacation. He wrote notes to himself. Light rope broke under stress of being tightened. Use heavy rope next time. He collected torture porn that matched exactly how their mutilated bodies were found. He had nearly 300 guns locked in a basement vault. And he saved digital searches about his own murders like trophies. Before we continue, share, hit subscribe right now. Turn on notifications. Because this man wrote a murder manifesto in Microsoft Word, deleted it, and thought no one would ever find it. Police found it, and what's inside will disturb you for weeks. December 11th, 2010. Suffolk County Police Officer John Malia was conducting a routine training exercise with his cadaver dog, Blue, along Ocean Parkway near Gilgo Beach. This desolate stretch of highway cuts through marshland on Long Island's South Shore. Dense brush lines both sides of the road. Most drivers pass it without a second thought. But Blue picked up a scent that morning. What Officer Malia discovered in that tangled undergrowth would eventually expose one of America's most prolific serial killers. The remains were wrapped in camouflaged burlap, the kind hunters use for duck blinds. Skeletal, bound, discarded like garbage. 2 days later, police returned to search the area more thoroughly. Within a quarter-mile radius, they found 3 more sets of remains. All women, all petite, under 5 feet tall, around 100 pounds. All in their 20s. All had worked as escorts advertising on Craigslist. All had been strangled. All had been bound with belts or tape before being wrapped in that distinctive hunting burlap. These 4 women, Melissa Barthelemy, Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Megan Waterman, and Amber Costello, would become known as the Gilgo Four. Their discovery sparked a massive investigation that would stretch on for over a decade, go cold, restart, and ultimately lead investigators to a man who had been hiding in plain sight the entire time. But here's the detail that makes this case uniquely terrifying. The man responsible for their deaths knew Ocean Parkway intimately. From 1981 to 1984, Rex Andrew Heuermann worked at Jones Beach as a seasonal employee. His job? Driving an all-terrain vehicle along that very stretch of highway after dark, field to field, making sure beachgoers had left the property after closing time. He knew every access point, every patch of dense brush where a body could disappear, every blind spot where no one would ever look. For 30 years, he used that knowledge. For 30 years, he killed. And for 30 years, nobody suspected the quiet architect from Massapequa Park who caught the train to Manhattan every morning carrying a briefcase and wearing a 3-piece suit. Today, Rex Heuermann faces charges for murdering 7 women. The timeline of his alleged crimes stretches from 1993 to 2010. Prosecutors say the true number may be higher. His trial is expected to be one of the most closely watched in recent memory. And the evidence against him reads like something from a horror novel. Consider what investigators have alleged. A man who held a steady job for decades, who married and raised children, who paid his taxes and mowed his lawn and caught the train into the city every morning. That same man allegedly maintained a parallel existence as a serial killer. He allegedly planned murders with the precision of an architectural blueprint. He allegedly disposed of bodies along a highway he'd patrolled as a young man, decades earlier. He allegedly taunted victims' families using the victims' own phones. And he allegedly kept detailed notes about how to avoid getting caught. The duality is almost impossible to comprehend. How does someone compartmentalize to that degree? How does someone sit at the dinner table with their family hours after allegedly committing murder? How does someone kiss their children goodnight knowing what they've done? The answer, according to forensic psychologists, is that people like Rex Heuermann don't experience guilt the way normal people do. They lack the empathy that would make their crimes unbearable. They see other human beings as objects to be used and discarded. This is the story of the women whose lives were stolen. This is the story of how a monster created a blueprint for murder and thought he'd gotten away with it. And this is the story of how one witness, one truck, and one piece of pizza finally brought him down. The search that began on December 11th, 2010, was never supposed to find what it found. Officer Malia and his dog Blue were actually looking for someone else entirely. A woman named Shannon Gilbert who had vanished 7 months earlier after a frantic 911 call from Oak Beach, just miles away. Shannon was screaming that someone was trying to kill her. She ran from house to house, banging on doors, before disappearing into the marsh. She has never been conclusively linked to Heuermann, but her disappearance was the catalyst that exposed his crimes. In the months following the discovery of the Gilgo 4, police expanded their search. By April 2011, they had found 6 more sets of remains along Ocean Parkway and nearby beaches. A male Asian individual, a female toddler, women who had never been identified. The scope of the horror was beyond anything investigators had imagined. This wasn't just a serial killer. This was a graveyard hidden in plain sight along one of Long Island's most traveled roads. For years, investigators believed they were hunting multiple killers. The victims were too different. The dump sites varied. The timelines stretched too long. How could one man be responsible for all of this? The answer they would eventually learn was chilling. One man was responsible for at least 7. And he had been perfecting his craft for 3 decades. Maureen Brainerd Barnes was 25 years old and running out of options. She lived in Norwich, Connecticut, working seasonal telemarketing jobs that never lasted long enough. When unemployment hit and eviction notices started arriving, desperation pushed her toward escort work. It was supposed to be temporary, just until she got back on her feet. On July 6, 2007, Maureen boarded an Amtrak train from New London to New York City. She traveled with another woman who would return home early, leaving Maureen alone in the city. For 3 days, she worked. On July 9th, just before midnight, Maureen called a friend back in Connecticut. She said she was about to meet someone outside her motel. That wasn't her typical operating procedure. Maureen always met clients inside. Something about this one was different. She never made it back to the motel. 5 days later, a friend reported her missing. Police would later determine that Maureen Brainerd Barnes was the first of the Gilgo 4 to disappear, the first of Rex Heuermann's known Long Island victims. Maureen left behind a daughter, a little girl named Nicolette who would grow up without her mother, spending years not knowing what had happened to her. When Heuermann was finally indicted for Maureen's murder in January 2024, Nicolette was 24 years old, the same age Melissa Barthelemy had been when she vanished. In a statement, Nicolette said, "While the loss of my mom has been extremely painful, the indictment has brought hope for justice for my mom and my family." 17 years. That's how long Nicolette waited for answers. 17 years of birthdays, graduations, milestones her mother never saw. All because a man in Massapequa Park decided her mother's life was worth less than his twisted fantasies. Melissa Barthelemy was a Spitfire. That's how her family described the 24-year-old from Buffalo. At 4 feet 11 inches and 95 pounds, she was tiny but fierce. She had dreams, real ones. Melissa wanted to own her own hair salon someday. She graduated from beauty school, got her cosmetology license, and worked at a Supercuts in her hometown before moving to New York City to chase something bigger. The city was expensive. Hair styling jobs didn't pay enough. Melissa rented a $700 basement apartment in the Bronx. She adopted 5 cats. She told her parents she was doing cosmetology work. What she didn't tell them was that she'd started working as an escort when the bills got too high. It was supposed to be temporary. It always is. On July 12, 2009, Melissa was last seen sitting on the curb outside her apartment building. She had a date that night, a $1,000 booking for the following day on Long Island. She wouldn't tell her boyfriend who the client was. The next morning, she made a $900 deposit into her bank account. Then she checked her voicemail from 2 motels in Massapequa, the same town where Rex Heuermann lived. And then Melissa Barthelemy vanished. Her family reported her missing on July 18th. They called hospitals. They scoured the internet. They refused to believe she was gone. And then Melissa's 15-year-old sister Amanda started receiving phone calls that would haunt her for the rest of her life. The caller ID showed Melissa's number. Amanda's heart leaped when she saw her sister's name on the screen. Finally, Melissa was okay. She answered the phone, excited, relieved. But it wasn't Melissa on the other end. It was a man. He had a distinctive voice, a strong New York or Long Island accent, very monotone, emotionally flat, like a middle-aged white guy Amanda would later describe to investigators. He was calm, controlled, and utterly cruel. Over the following weeks, the man called 7 times. He never stayed on the line longer than 3 minutes, just under the threshold police typically need to pinpoint a cell phone's location. He seemed to know exactly how long he could talk before becoming traceable. He called Amanda by name. He told her he knew what she looked like. He called her sister a whore and described in graphic, sexually explicit detail what he had done to Melissa. Police traced the calls to densely populated locations in Manhattan, Times Square, Madison Square Garden, Penn Station. The caller seemed to know that surveillance cameras in such crowded areas would be useless. Some investigators speculated he might have law enforcement training. He was too careful, too calculated. The final call came on August 26, 2009. The man asked Amanda, "Do you think you'll ever see her again?" Before she could answer, he told her, "You won't. I killed her." Then he hung up. The call lasted less than a minute. But one of those 7 calls pinged off a cell tower in Massapequa, the same town where Rex Heuermann had lived his entire life. The attorney for Melissa's mother later described the caller as a calculating, stone-cold killer. He premeditated his acts. He knew what he was doing, and my personal belief is that Melissa was not his first victim. He started to get good at this, and he's getting better at it. Those words would prove prophetic. Melissa Barthelemy was not Rex Heuermann's first victim. She wasn't even close. The 7 calls to Amanda remain one of the most haunting aspects of the entire case. The caller knew details he shouldn't have known. He knew Amanda's name. He knew what she looked like. He mocked a grieving teenager, describing her sister's death in explicit terms designed to maximize psychological torture. He was getting off not just on killing Melissa, but on tormenting her family afterward. Police worked frantically to trace the calls, but the caller was sophisticated. He never stayed on the line long enough. He called from crowded locations where surveillance footage would be useless. He seemed to understand exactly how much time he had before a trace could lock onto his position. Some investigators theorized he had law enforcement training. Others believed he had simply studied how to evade detection. The planning document found on his computer years later proved the latter theory correct. Melissa's mother Lynn never stopped fighting. She kept a notebook where she wrote down every detail she learned about the case. She talked to other victims' families. She demanded answers from police. She held press conferences. She refused to let her daughter become just another statistic, just another sex worker whose death was quietly forgotten. "All I can say is he's sick," Lynn told reporters. "And he's going to make a mistake. And we're going to catch him." She was right. It just took 14 years. Megan Waterman was 22 years old, the youngest of the Gilgo Four. She had a 3-year-old daughter named Liliana waiting for her back in Maine. A little girl who would grow up without her mother, raised by relatives, never fully understanding why mommy never came home. Megan didn't choose this life. She was a victim of sex trafficking. In June 2010, her boyfriend at the time brought her to New York and forced her into escort work. She was trapped in a nightmare she couldn't escape. A private investigator named Dottie Laster, who worked with a nonprofit trying to find Megan after she disappeared, later revealed something chilling. Megan had told people her clients included doctors, lawyers, and law enforcement. On June 6, 2010, Megan was staying at a Holiday Inn Express in Hauppauge, New York. Surveillance footage from that night shows her in the hotel lobby. She walked out of those doors and into the darkness. Her phone's last signal pinged off a cell tower in Massapequa Park, the same town where Rex Heuermann lived, the same town where Melissa Barthelemy's voicemail had been checked a year earlier. Investigators believe Megan was killed soon after leaving that hotel. Her remains would be found 6 months later, wrapped in burlap along Ocean Parkway with the other Gilgo victims. Her daughter Liliana is 16 years old now, living with a relative, doing well in high school, carrying a weight no teenager should ever have to carry. Megan's sister Allie spoke to reporters after Heuermann's arrest. Her words were devastating in their simplicity. "It's bittersweet. I know the details of her death now, so I put the face to the details. I don't necessarily like having that closure, but it is such a relief that we do know who it was, that it will come to an end eventually." Amber Lynn Costello was 27 years old. Unlike the others, Amber had a witness, someone who came face to face with her killer the night before she died and lived to tell investigators about it. That witness's description would eventually crack the entire case wide open, but it would take 12 years. Amber grew up in Wilmington, North Carolina, surrounded by a family who loved her. But addiction had taken hold early. Despite multiple stints in rehab, despite moving to New York for a fresh start, despite briefly finding faith and getting involved with a church, the grip of drugs never fully loosened. By 2010, Amber was living in West Babylon, Long Island, working as an escort to support her habit. Her roommate was a man named Dave Schaller. Schaller and Amber had a scam they ran on clients. It was simple but effective. Once Amber collected the money, Schaller would burst into the room pretending to be her angry boyfriend, wielding a baseball bat. The terrified client would flee, Amber kept the cash, and nobody got hurt. They'd pulled it off multiple times. On September 1st, 2010, a new client contacted Amber through a burner phone. Schaller was ready to run the scam when the man showed up at their house. But one look at this client changed everything. The man was enormous. 6 feet 4 inches tall, maybe 6'6". He had bushy hair and sunglasses even though it was nighttime. But it was his eyes that Schaller would never forget. Empty, flat, like there was nothing behind them. Schaller later told police the man looked like an ogre, like Frankenstein's monster, like the size of a mountain. The man was driving a dark-colored pickup truck with a distinctive triangular brace at the back, a design feature unique to first-generation Chevrolet Avalanches. Schaller confronted him, ready to run the boyfriend routine, but something stopped him. This man was too big, too calm, too dangerous. Schaller backed off. The ogre said simply, "Tell her I'll give her a call." Then he drove away. The next evening, September 2nd, the ogre called again. This time he insisted Amber come to his location. He didn't want another run-in with the boyfriend. He offered $1,500 for an overnight visit, 6 times her usual rate. Despite every warning sign, despite Schaller's protests, Amber agreed. The money was too good to pass up. At approximately 11:20 that night, Amber Costello left her house. She was wearing a pink hoodie and jeans. She didn't take her phone. She didn't take her purse. That wasn't like her. Amber always had her phone. She walked around the corner toward the dark-colored truck that was waiting for her. Schaller watched from the window as the truck drove past the house one final time. He never saw Amber alive again. Schaller told police about the ogre and his truck within months of the bodies being discovered. He described the man's height, his empty gaze, the triangular feature on the back of the pickup. Investigators eventually identified the vehicle as a first-generation Chevrolet Avalanche. But somehow that tip got buried, lost in a sea of leads and dead ends. It would take a new task force 12 years later to finally act on what Dave Schaller had told them from the beginning. When Schaller learned about Rex Heuermann's arrest, he had one reaction. He was the first person who jumped in my head. When they told me she was dead, he was the first person I thought of. The $1,500 offer haunted investigators for years. It was 6 times Amber's normal rate, an amount so high it should have been a warning sign. Why would anyone pay that much? The answer was simple and horrifying. Because he wasn't paying for sex. He was paying for time. Time to do whatever he wanted without interruption. Time to carry out the fantasies he had been planning in that Microsoft Word document. Amber's family in North Carolina had been trying to save her for years. Her mother had begged her to come home. She had completed multiple rehab programs. She had briefly found faith and gotten involved with a church. But addiction is a disease that doesn't care about family or faith or good intentions. And predators like Rex Heuermann specifically target women caught in that struggle. Women who are vulnerable, who need money, who can't afford to say no to a suspicious offer. The night Amber disappeared, her housemates reported her missing almost immediately. They knew something was wrong. Amber never left without her phone. She never went anywhere without telling someone where she'd be. The pink hoodie and jeans she wore that night would be described in missing persons reports, flyers, news articles. But by the time the sun rose the next morning, Amber Costello was already dead. But the Gilgo Four were not Rex Heuermann's first victims. Not even close. In June 2024, prosecutors stunned the public by charging Heuermann with 2 additional murders that pushed the timeline of his alleged crimes back by nearly 2 decades. And in December 2024, a 7th victim was added to the indictment. The picture that emerged was of a predator who had been killing since his 20s, and getting away with it for over 30 years. Sandra Costilla was 28 years old. She had immigrated to the United States from Trinidad and Tobago, settling in Queens and trying to build a new life. On November 19 or 20, 1993, Sandra was killed. Her body was dumped in a wooded area near Fish Cove in North Sea, Southampton, nowhere near Gilgo Beach. 2 hunters discovered her remains. She had been strangled and suffered numerous sharp force injuries. Police identified her through fingerprints that were in the system from a 1992 arrest for jumping a subway turnstile. For 31 years, Sandra Costilla's murder remained unsolved. It was never connected to the Gilgo Beach killings because the location didn't match, the timeline didn't match. Nothing seemed to connect her to the other victims. Detectives even suspected a different serial killer, a man named John Bitrolf, who was later convicted of murdering 2 other women. But advanced DNA technology changed everything. Hair recovered from Sandra's body was tested using methods that didn't exist in 1993. The results came back, a 99.96% match to Rex Heuermann. In 1993, Heuermann was 29 years old. He wasn't yet married to Asa Ellerup. He was living with a different woman at the Massapequa Park house. Sandra Costilla represents the earliest known killing attributed to Heuermann. She died when he was barely into his adult life. Jessica Taylor was just 20 years old, a sex worker near the Port Authority bus terminal in Midtown Manhattan, the same area where Rex Heuermann commuted to work every single day. In July 2003, Jessica disappeared. A woman walking her dog discovered her remains in the Manorville Pine Barrens, roughly 25 miles from where the Gilgo Four would later be found. What investigators found was horrifying. Jessica had been decapitated. Her arms had been severed below the elbow. A distinctive tattoo on her body had been deliberately cut away, obliterated with a sharp object. Prosecutors believe these mutilations were specifically designed to prevent identification. No face for facial recognition, no hands for fingerprints, no tattoo for visual ID. Underneath Jessica's body, investigators found a surgical drape. On that drape was a male human hair. 8 years later, in March 2011, more of Jessica's remains were discovered. Her skull, hands, and forearm turned up along Ocean Parkway, just east of where the Gilgo Four had been found months earlier. The same killer, 2 different dump sites, miles apart, years apart. Cell phone records confirmed that when Jessica Taylor disappeared in July 2003, Rex Heuermann's wife and children were vacationing at Smuggler's Notch in Vermont. He was alone in the family home, free to do whatever he wanted without fear of discovery. To understand how Rex Heuermann became a monster, you have to go back further. Back to Berner High School in Massapequa, class of 1981. Back to a bullied teenager who would grow up to allegedly kill at least 7 women. Heuermann's classmates remembered him as an outcast. He was, in the words of one former schoolmate, everybody's punching bag. A man named John Parisi recalled an incident in 6th grade when a group of kids tried to beat Heuermann up, only stopping when a teacher intervened. The verbal torment continued for years. Parisi said Heuermann would take it and walk away. But Parisi saw something else too, something that scared him. "I was really scared of him," he told reporters. He was the type of guy if he snapped, he could really hurt you. He was disillusioned and he was misguided. You had to be very careful. Other classmates described Heuermann as creepy, nerdy, a loner with a mean streak. He had an empty gaze, the same phrase Dave Schaller would use to describe the ogre who took Amber Costello decades later. Heuermann volunteered as a stagehand for the drama club. He kept to himself, and he developed a crush on a classmate named Maureen Boyleholpit. Maureen found and signed love notes in her locker. "Do you like me? Yes or no?" they asked. One day, she caught Heuermann in the act of leaving one. She didn't return his feelings, but she wasn't afraid of him either. "He seemed like a nice person," she later told reporters. "I felt sorry for him. Very quiet, kind of shy. Seemed like a gentle giant. Kind of nerdy. I was nice to him." Actor Billy Baldwin was in that same graduating class. When news of Heuermann's arrest broke, Baldwin tweeted, "Woke up this morning to learn that the Gilgo Beach serial killer suspect was my high school classmate Rex Heuermann. Married, 2 kids, architect. Average guy, quiet, family man. Mind-boggling. Massapequa is in shock." After graduation, Heuermann declined to join alumni groups or attend reunions. He simply disappeared into adulthood, building a successful career as an architect while allegedly building something much darker in secret. By 1993, when he allegedly killed Sandra Costilla, he had been out of high school for 12 years. By 2010, when the Gilgo Four were discovered, he had been killing for nearly 2 decades. And nobody suspected a thing. Heuermann founded his architectural firm, RH Consultants and Associates, in 1994. According to the company's now-defunct website, his clients included major corporations: Target, American Airlines, Foot Locker. He worked on commercial projects across the city. He was, by all external measures, a successful professional. He wore 3-piece suits. He carried a briefcase. He caught the Long Island Railroad into Manhattan every morning like thousands of other commuters. But his neighbors never warmed to him. "We would cross the street," one told reporters. "He was somebody you don't want to approach." Another described feeling uncomfortable whenever Heuermann was around. They couldn't explain why. There was just something off about him. That empty gaze. The way he looked through people rather than at them. The Massapequa Park house where Heuermann lived his entire adult life became increasingly dilapidated over the years. The front porch sagged. Paint peeled from the siding. Wooden 2x4s propped up structural elements that should have been properly repaired. Neighbors wondered why an architect, someone who designed buildings for a living, would let his own home fall into such disrepair. They didn't know what was happening inside. In 1996, Heuermann married Asa Ellerup, a woman from Sweden who had a son from a previous relationship. Together they had a daughter, Victoria. By all appearances, they were a normal suburban family. Asa worked part-time. The kids went to local schools. They had dinner together. They took vacations. And those vacations, police would later discover, always coincided with murders. As we move on, like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell. For over a decade after the discovery of the Gilgo Four, the investigation went nowhere. Different agencies pointed fingers at each other. Promising leads disappeared into bureaucratic black holes. The families of the victims waited in agony, holding press conferences, pleading for answers that never came. Some began to believe justice would never arrive. The original investigation had gathered mountains of evidence. Phone records, witness statements, forensic samples, interviews with hundreds of potential witnesses. But they couldn't connect the dots. The burner phones used to contact the victims were untraceable. The DNA technology of the era couldn't extract usable profiles from degraded hair samples. And somehow, Dave Schaller's description of the ogre and his Chevrolet Avalanche had gotten lost in the shuffle, buried beneath thousands of tips that led nowhere. Everything changed in February 2022. A new multi-agency task force was formed to take a fresh look at the cold case. Detectives from Suffolk County Police worked alongside the FBI, the District Attorney's Office, and the Sheriff's Department. They digitized 12 years' worth of evidence, making it searchable for the first time. And within just 6 weeks, they had their first major breakthrough. An investigator reviewing old case files came across Dave Schaller's witness statement from 2010. The description of the ogre. The dark pickup truck with the triangular brace at the back. The detail about the vehicle had been noted but apparently never acted upon. When investigators ran first-generation Chevrolet Avalanche through a vehicle registration database, filtering for the geographic area they'd identified through cell tower analysis, one name stood out above all others: Rex Andrew Heuermann, Massapequa Park, New York. The Chevy Avalanche was still registered in his name in 2022, 12 years after Amber Costello's murder. He had never gotten rid of it. Investigators began building their case. They analyzed cell phone records going back to 2007, mapping the movements of burner phones used to contact the victims against the movements of Heuermann's personal phone. The patterns were damning. On July 10, 2009, the last day Melissa Barthelemy was seen alive. Both a burner phone and Heuermann's personal phone traveled from Massapequa to Manhattan and back again. At the same times, on the same routes, moving together like they were in the same vehicle. When the taunting phone calls were made to Melissa's sister Amanda, investigators traced them to Midtown Manhattan, the exact area where Heuermann worked. One call pinged off a tower near Madison Square Garden, another near Times Square, a third near Penn Station, all within walking distance of his architectural firm's office on Fifth Avenue. But circumstantial evidence wasn't enough. They needed DNA. In late 2022, detectives began surveillance on Heuermann. They followed him through Manhattan, waiting for him to discard something they could test. They recovered a cup he threw in a trash can, but the DNA sample wasn't clean enough for a definitive match. They needed something better. In July 2022, a detective made a crucial decision. He went to Heuermann's house on trash day and took 11 bottles from the garbage left at the curb. The bottles went to a forensic lab. In February 2023, the results came back. DNA from those bottles matched genetic material recovered from the victims. But there was something even more damning. For years, investigators had been puzzled by female hairs found on multiple victims' bodies. The hairs were on belts used to bind the women, on tape wrapped around their remains, caught in the burlap used to dispose of them. In 2010, the technology to identify those hairs didn't exist. By 2023, it did. Advanced mitochondrial DNA testing revealed that those female hairs belonged to Rex Heuermann's wife, Asa Ellerup. Additional testing found hairs matching his daughter Victoria on some victims. And a male hair found on burlap wrapping Megan Waterman's body matched Heuermann himself with 99.96% certainty. Asa Ellerup wasn't a suspect. Cell phone records and travel documents proved she was out of the country or out of state during each of the murders. The theory was that Heuermann had transferred his wife's and daughter's hair onto his victims from his own body, from the clothes they wore, the bed they shared, surfaces throughout the home. The family who had unknowingly lived with a serial killer had unknowingly helped investigators build the case against him. Prosecutors also discovered hair from Heuermann's first wife, a woman he lived with before marrying Asa, on some of the earlier victims. 3 different women's hair, spanning decades, all transferred from a man who allegedly killed in the same house where his families ate breakfast, watched television, celebrated holidays. If you're following this case closely, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on. The trial is expected to be one of the most significant in recent memory. And what investigators found on Heuermann's computers will disturb you in ways you can't imagine. The DNA evidence against Heuermann relies on a technique called whole genome sequencing, a cutting-edge method that wasn't available when the murders occurred. Traditional DNA testing requires relatively large, well-preserved samples. But the hairs found on victims had degraded over years of exposure to the elements. Whole genome sequencing can extract usable profiles from much smaller, more damaged samples. It was this technological advancement that finally made the case solvable. The defense has challenged this evidence, arguing that the technology is too new and hasn't been sufficiently validated by the scientific community. They've brought in expert witnesses to question the methodology. But Judge Motzi ruled that the testing meets the legal standard for admissibility. The jury will hear the DNA evidence. Beyond DNA, investigators built an overwhelming circumstantial case. They obtained records from more than 300 subpoenas and search warrants. They mapped cell phone movements going back 15 years. They analyzed internet search histories spanning decades. They interviewed witnesses who had come forward immediately after the murders but whose tips had been lost in the bureaucratic chaos of the original investigation. The prosecution's theory is straightforward. Rex Heuermann lived a double life. By day, he was a commuter, an architect, a family man. By night, specifically on nights when his family was away, he transformed into a predator. He used burner phones to contact victims. He met them under cover of darkness. He brought them back to his family home. And when he was finished with them, he disposed of their bodies along a stretch of highway he knew intimately from his youth. July 13, 2023. Approximately 8:30 in the evening, Rex Heuermann left his architectural firm's office in Midtown Manhattan, the same office he'd been commuting to for over 30 years. He stepped onto Fifth Avenue, briefcase in hand, heading for the train that would take him home to Massapequa Park. He never made it to the station. Law enforcement officers surrounded him on the street. The 60-year-old architect was taken into custody without incident. The man who had allegedly evaded detection for 3 decades, who had written a murder manifesto and thought he'd deleted it forever, who had hidden in plain sight while building a successful career and raising a family, that man was finally in handcuffs. That same night, police arrived at his Massapequa Park home. His wife Asa and their adult children were inside. Officers informed them of the accusations, then seized passports, computers, phones, iPads, and anything else that might contain evidence. The family was blindsided. They had no idea what Rex had allegedly been doing for the past 30 years. What investigators found inside the Heuermann residence shocked even veteran law enforcement. The house itself was dilapidated from the outside. Neighbors described it as a dump, the only home on the block that looked neglected, with a front porch held up by wooden 2x4s. Inside, it was cluttered and chaotic, packed with boxes and belongings accumulated over decades. But in the basement, behind a thick metal door, was something else entirely. A walk-in vault, large enough for a person to stand inside comfortably. And within that vault, police found between 279 and 297 firearms, rifles, handguns, weapons of every type, an arsenal stockpiled by a man his neighbors thought was just a quiet architect. The search of the home lasted 12 days. Investigators tore open the bathtub, searching for trace evidence in the pipes and tiles. They used ground-penetrating radar in the backyard, looking for buried remains. They brought in an excavator to dig up the yard. They dismantled a wooden deck. Crime lab technicians in hazmat suits carried out box after box of potential evidence. Among the items removed, a child-sized doll enclosed in a glass display case, a large framed painting of a blonde woman with bruised eyes and a gash on her cheek, a filing cabinet full of documents, computers, hard drives, more than 350 electronic devices in total. While no human remains were found on the property, prosecutors described the amount of material collected as massive. But the most damning evidence came from those electronic devices. On a laptop recovered from the basement, investigators found something that would become central to the prosecution's case. A Microsoft Word document that prosecutors now call a blueprint for murder. The file was named HK 2002-04. It had been deleted, but forensic analysts recovered it. It was written entirely in capital letters, divided into chilling categories that read like an instruction manual for serial killing. The first section was labeled Problems. It listed everything that could lead to detection: DNA, tire marks, blood stains, fingerprints, witnesses, photos, police stops, plastic bags that could be matched to their original box. It was a checklist of mistakes to avoid, a how not to get caught guide written by a man who had apparently been perfecting his methods for years. The next section was supplies. It detailed what was needed to carry out the killings: booties to cover footprints, acid, rope and cord, saw and cutting tools, a burn can for destroying evidence, tarps, bags and tape. Every item a serial killer would need to capture, restrain, torture, kill, and dispose of a human being. A section labeled DS, which investigators believe stands for dump sites, listed a location that matched exactly where victims were actually found. He had written down where he planned to leave the bodies before he even killed them. Another section, TRG, believed to mean targets, included the note, "Small is good." Every single one of Heuermann's known victims was petite, under 5 feet tall, around 100 pounds. He had a type, and he wrote it down. The document contained categories for PRE prep, and post-event. Under post-event, entries included burn gloves, dispose of pictures taken of the victims, have story set, alibis prepared for family or law enforcement if questioned. Another entry read, get sleep before hunt. A separate section detailed body prep, with instructions about removing heads, hands, and identifying marks. Jessica Taylor had been found decapitated with her hands severed and a tattoo cut away. He had followed his own instructions. The document also contained notes referencing FBI profiler John Douglas's book, Mindhunter, a text about how serial killers are caught. Heuermann wasn't just killing. He was studying, learning from the mistakes of others, trying to become the perfect predator. Investigators also found that Heuermann had searched the internet more than 200 times for updates on the Gilgo Beach investigation. He searched for photos of the victims and their families. He tried to track down the victims' relatives online. He searched for sadistic torture pornography and child sexual abuse material. The pornographic images he accessed, prosecutors said, notably and largely coincide with how the remains of the victims were discovered. He had been watching, studying, getting off on his own crimes while searching for any sign that investigators were getting close. And for over a decade, they weren't. The planning document represents something rare in serial killer cases, a written confession of methodology. Most killers don't write things down. They rely on memory, on instinct, on learned patterns. But Heuermann was an architect by training. He was methodical, organized. He approached murder the same way he approached building design, with blueprints, with checklists, with careful attention to potential problems. Legal experts have called the document unprecedented. It doesn't just show premeditation, it shows systematic, repeated premeditation over decades. It shows a man who treated killing as a project to be optimized. The reference to John Douglas's Mindhunter is particularly chilling. That book was written to help law enforcement understand and catch serial killers. Heuermann apparently read it to learn what mistakes to avoid. The internet search history recovered from Heuermann's devices painted an equally disturbing picture. Investigators found that he had been monitoring news coverage of the Gilgo Beach case obsessively. He searched for the names of victims and their family members. He searched for information about the investigation's progress. He searched for details about DNA testing technology, apparently trying to understand whether advances in forensics might eventually catch up to him. His pornographic searches matched the way victims were found, bound, restrained, positioned in specific ways. Prosecutors argued this wasn't coincidence. He was fantasizing about his crimes, reliving them. The murder wasn't the end of his pleasure. It was the beginning of a cycle that continued every time he revisited the memory through violent pornography. As we move on, like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell. 6 days after Rex Heuermann's arrest, his wife of 27 years filed for divorce. Asa Ellerup had stood beside him through decades of marriage, raised 2 children with him, shared a bed with him in the same house where he allegedly tortured and killed women. She had no idea. Suffolk County Police Commissioner Rodney Harrison addressed the question directly at a press conference. "If you ask me, I don't believe that they knew about this double life that Mr. Heuermann was living." He described Asa and her daughter as shocked, disgusted, and embarrassed when they learned of the charges. "Their lives," he said, "have been completely turned upside down." The divorce was finalized on March 27, 2025, but Asa's attorney revealed something complicated. She filed for divorce primarily to protect the family's assets, not because she believed her husband was guilty. In a documentary released in 2025, she still referred to him as "my husband," despite the divorce being finalized. She still visits him in jail regularly. She still maintains he is not capable of the crimes he's charged with. In March 2024, Asa released a statement through her attorney. "I will listen to all of the evidence and withhold judgment until the end of trial," she said. "I have given Rex the benefit of the doubt, as we all deserve." She extended her heartfelt sympathies to the victims and their families. Nobody deserves to die in that manner. But her daughter Victoria tells a different story. In the same documentary, Victoria admitted off-camera that she believes her father most likely committed the killings. "Whether or not I believe my dad did it, I'm on the fence about that," she said during filming. Later, she told producers she believes he probably did it. She was too young to remember anything. The family was always out of town when the murders allegedly occurred. She didn't see it. She didn't know. Now she has to live with the reality that her father may be one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. The family's situation is devastating. Their home became a crime scene for 12 days. When Asa returned after the search, she found rooms piled with mess and boxes, furniture destroyed, the bathtub cut open. "Everything is destroyed," she told reporters. "My children cry themselves to sleep. And I've been crying myself to sleep too." Their son Christopher has developmental disabilities. He was unable to comprehend what was happening, crying himself to sleep night after night. "He's so distraught and doesn't understand," Asa said. "And as a mother, I have no answers for him." Their daughter Victoria, 28 years old, had worked at her father's architectural firm, which has since shut down. Both children are now unemployed and struggle to maintain any semblance of normalcy. Their attorney described the impossible situation. "Chris can't even walk his dog down the block without being recognized. People constantly stop in front of the house to gawk and point and take pictures." The family plans to sell the house and relocate to South Carolina. Asa said she's lost any emotional attachment to the property because of everything that's gone on. The only way she can start recovering is to move. Asa herself is battling breast and skin cancer. Because Rex was the sole provider for the family, she lost her health insurance after his arrest. The daughter of the Happy Face killer and the daughter of the BTK killer have both reached out to offer support. Two women who understand what it means to discover your father is a monster. A GoFundMe page set up on Asa's behalf raised over $50,000, mostly going to medical bills. Neighbors spoke about the family to reporters after the arrest. "We would cross the street," one said. "He was somebody you don't want to approach." Another described the family as quiet, keeping to themselves. "My daughter went to school with their daughter, but we never saw anything suspicious." The horror had been hiding in plain sight. For 30 years, Rex Heuermann lived as a husband, a father, and architect. He commuted to Manhattan. He paid his mortgage. He attended family dinners. And allegedly, when his family was out of town, he transformed into something else entirely. One detail haunts investigators and family members alike. His wife's hair was found on multiple victims. His daughter's hair too. Not because they were involved, they weren't, but because he carried pieces of them with him when he killed. Strands from their hairbrushes, from pillows, from the couch where they watched TV together. Transferred from his body to the bodies of his victims. The family he claimed to love became unwitting evidence in the case against him. The psychological toll on the Heuermann family is impossible to fully comprehend. Imagine waking up one morning and learning that your husband, the man you've slept beside for 27 years, may have tortured and killed 7 women. Imagine learning that he allegedly committed these crimes in the same house where you raised your children. Imagine knowing that your own hair, shed naturally from your head, ended up on the bodies of murder victims. Asa Ellerup has said she never saw any warning signs. No unexplained absences. No suspicious behavior. No blood on his clothes. Either Rex Heuermann was extraordinarily careful, or Asa was extraordinarily trusting, or some combination of both. The prosecution believes he planned every murder for times when his family would be away. Vacations, trips to see relatives, overnight stays elsewhere. He knew exactly when he would be alone. Mental health professionals who study serial killers have noted that many maintain seemingly normal family lives. BTK killer Dennis Rader was a church leader and Boy Scout leader. Green River killer Gary Ridgway was married with a son. John Wayne Gacy threw neighborhood block parties. The ability to compartmentalize, to be a monster in one context and a seemingly normal person in another, is a hallmark of psychopathy. For Asa, Victoria, and Christopher, the nightmare continues every day. They cannot escape the news coverage. They cannot escape the photographers camped outside their home. They cannot escape the knowledge that their last name is now synonymous with serial murder. They are victims too, not of violence, but of betrayal so profound it defies comprehension. Rex Heuermann has pleaded not guilty to all charges. His defense attorney, Michael Brown, has maintained from day one, "He told me he didn't do this." Nothing about Mr. Heuermann would suggest he is involved in these incidents. The defense has fought every piece of evidence, challenging the DNA technology as unproven, arguing that the cases should be split into separate trials, questioning the chain of custody for forensic samples. In September 2025, Judge Timothy Motze rejected both major defense arguments. The cutting-edge DNA evidence was ruled admissible. The 7 murders will be tried together in a single trial. The judge pointed to the planning document found on Heuermann's hard drive as evidence that the crimes were part of a connected pattern. A single predator following the same blueprint over 3 decades. The judge also noted something crucial. Heuermann's employment at Jones Beach in the early 1980s made him uniquely familiar with Ocean Parkway at night, the very corridor where 6 of the 7 victims' remains were found or dumped. A seasonal job from 40 years ago became evidence of his knowledge, his access, his ability to disappear bodies in a place most people drive past without a second thought. The prosecution has filed a statement of readiness with a 723-page evidence inventory. 723 pages of documentation. Phone records, DNA analysis, forensic reports, witness statements, the murder manifesto, internet search histories, photographs, surveillance records. They say they are ready for trial. The next court date is January 13, 2026, where additional motions will be heard. A trial date will be announced following that hearing. If convicted on all counts, Rex Heuermann faces multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. He is 62 years old. He will die in prison, but the investigation is far from over. 11 sets of remains were discovered along Ocean Parkway between 1996 and 2011. Not all have been attributed to Heuermann. In December 2025, a different suspect was charged with 2 of those deaths. Andrew Dykes, the biological father of a toddler found among the remains, was arrested for the murders of his daughter Tatiana and her mother Tanya Jackson. Ocean Parkway, it seems, was a dumping ground for multiple killers. A desolate stretch of highway where predators disposed of their victims, never knowing, or perhaps not caring, that they were using the same corridor. Investigators continue to use the advanced DNA technology that caught Heuermann to examine other cold cases across the region. There may be more victims. There may be more charges. The question that haunts everyone connected to this case is simple. How many? 7 women have been attributed to Heuermann so far, but investigators believe there may be more. The timeline of his alleged crimes spans 30 years. The planning document suggests a killer who had refined his methods over many iterations. Were there victims before Sandra Costilla in 1993? Were there victims in the years between Jessica Taylor in 2003 and the Gilgo 4 in 2007 to 2010? Police have entered Heuermann's DNA into national databases, checking it against unsolved cases across the country. His internet searches suggest he traveled for work. His knowledge of disposal sites may extend beyond Long Island. Until his trial concludes, and perhaps long after, the full scope of his alleged crimes may never be known. The victims' families have waited years for this moment. Maureen Brainerd Barnes's daughter Nicolette grew from a child into an adult waiting for answers. Megan Waterman's daughter Liliana grew from a toddler into a teenager. Melissa Barthelomy's mother Lynn never stopped fighting. Amber Costello's family in North Carolina never stopped hoping. They have lived with uncertainty, with grief, with the particular torture of not knowing who took their loved ones or why. Now they know. Rex Andrew Heuermann sits in a Suffolk County jail cell, awaiting trial for 7 counts of murder. His architectural firm has closed. His marriage has ended. His children struggle to comprehend what their father allegedly did. The man who thought he was smarter than everyone, who wrote a murder manifesto and studied how serial killers get caught, was ultimately undone by the simplest things. A witness who remembered an ogre in a truck, bottles left in his trash, and technological advances he couldn't have predicted. District Attorney Ray Tierney has been clear about his mission. We're not going to stop. We can't stop. We owe that to the victims. This case is about victims and their families, and hopefully providing them with that small measure of closure. Closure. Such a small word for such an enormous loss. Melissa Barthélemy dreamed of owning her own hair salon. She was 4 feet 11 inches tall and weighed 95 pounds. Her family called her a Spitfire. She died at 24. Megan Waterman had a 3-year-old daughter named Liliana waiting for her to come home. Liliana is 16 now, doing well in high school, carrying a weight no teenager should ever have to carry. Megan died at 22. Maureen Brainerd Barnes left behind a little girl named Nicolette who grew up without her mother. Nicolette waited 17 years for answers. Maureen died at 25. Amber Costello was trying to fight her way back from addiction. She left her house in a pink hoodie and jeans, walking toward a dark truck parked around the corner. She died at 27. Sandra Costilla immigrated from Trinidad and Tobago seeking a better life. She was identified through fingerprints from a subway turnstile arrest. She died at 28. Jessica Taylor was a sex worker near the Port Authority bus terminal. She was decapitated to prevent identification. Parts of her body were found 8 years apart. She died at 20. Valerie Mack deserved better than to be forgotten. They all did. Valerie was the 7th victim added to Heuermann's indictment, charged in December 2024. Like Jessica Taylor, her remains were found in 2 locations, part in Manaville in 2000, part along Ocean Parkway in 2011. For 24 years, she wasn't even identified. She was known only as Jane Doe No. 6. Advanced DNA technology finally gave her back her name. She was 24 years old when she died. These women were not just victims. They were daughters, sisters, mothers, friends. They had dreams and fears and people who loved them. The system failed them when they were alive, dismissing their disappearances because of who they were and what they did for money. The investigation failed them for over a decade after their deaths, letting crucial leads slip through the cracks while their families waited in agony. There is a cruel irony in how this case unfolded. The victims were marginalized in life. Sex workers whose disappearances didn't make headlines, whose cases didn't receive the resources they deserved. Even in death, they remained marginalized for years, their murders unsolved while investigators chased other priorities. It took a new task force, new technology, and a renewed commitment to finally treat their deaths with the seriousness they always deserved. Advocates for sex workers' rights have pointed to this case as evidence of systemic bias in how law enforcement handles crimes against marginalized populations. When these women disappeared, police responses were often slow or dismissive. Families were told their loved ones had probably just moved on or gone underground. The assumption was that women in the sex trade were transient, unreliable, not worth the effort of a thorough investigation. That assumption may have cost lives. If investigators had taken Dave Schaller's tip about the ogre more seriously in 2010, if they had run a vehicle search immediately, if they had connected the dots between Massapequa Park and the dump sites, would there have been fewer victims? We'll never know. What we know is that Rex Heuermann allegedly continued killing for at least some time after the Gilgo 4 were discovered. He was watching the investigation. He was studying it. And he apparently believed he was still safe. But finally, after all these years, their stories are being heard. Their killer is behind bars. And justice, delayed as it has been, is finally within reach. Rex Heuermann wrote a murder manifesto. He called his torture sessions playtime. He noted that light rope broke under stress and he should use heavy rope next time. He collected pornography that matched how his victims' mutilated bodies were found. He had nearly 300 guns in his basement. He deleted his planning document and thought no one would ever find it. Police found it. All of it. And now the man who wrote those words, who planned those killings, who deleted those files thinking they were gone forever, that man sits in a jail cell waiting to face judgment. The architect who designed buildings by day and allegedly designed murder by night. The family man who allegedly strangled women in the same house where his children slept. The commuter who blended into Manhattan crowds while allegedly taunting a 15-year-old girl about her dead sister. His defense will argue reasonable doubt. They'll challenge the DNA evidence. They'll question the witnesses. They'll paint alternative theories about who might have committed these crimes. That's their job. And in the American justice system, Rex Heuermann is presumed innocent until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. But the evidence speaks. 723 pages of it. DNA from his wife and daughter on victims' bodies. DNA from his own body on burlap wrapping. Cell phone records placing burner phones in the same locations as his personal device, at the same times moving in the same directions. Internet searches for the very crimes he's accused of committing. A planning document that reads like a confession. The truth about Rex Heuermann will emerge in a courtroom. 12 jurors will weigh the evidence. They'll hear from experts and witnesses. They'll see the planning document and the internet searches and the DNA results. And they'll decide whether this quiet architect from Massapequa Park is guilty of murdering 7 women over 3 decades. The trial of Rex Heuermann will be one of the most closely watched in recent memory. When it begins, Crime Case Voices will be there with full coverage. If you want to follow this case from opening statements to verdict, make sure you're subscribed and have that notification bell turned on. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this story. These women deserve to be remembered. They deserve justice, and we will not look away until they get it. Thank you for watching. This is Crime Case Voices. Stay safe out there.